You just couldn't stay away. You had to see what Mama was up to, didn't you? What's Mama doing? A well-rounded, developed character feels real. They could be part of your circle of friends or someone you meet at the coffee shop. Heck, they could be part of your family, someone that you could invite into your home and have a meal with. So what is it that makes a character feel so real? And how do you generate such characters in your own writing? Well, today I'm going to show you a tool that I use that's based on science and psychology to create my characters. Non-modifiable characteristics such as age and ethnicity and physical characteristics, and physical characteristics being hair color, eye color, skin color, those things are important to your characters, but only to a certain extent. While these features might give a clue to your reader as to the culture that your character might be coming from, cultures and families are very diverse, and these things are not certain. So in my opinion, that's not the most important thing about your character. Instead, I want to do a deep dive into psychology, into the characters' personalities and characteristics and what's going on in their heads. When you have your character's personality down, a lot of times your dialogue and certain interactions between certain characters will write themselves. Then you can kind of go back and fill in certain things about your character, like what's their favorite TV show, what's their favorite color, what's their favorite food. And it'll actually come together and be easier for you once you have the basics of their personality down. Whenever I have a character in mind, I try to put them through one of those personality tests. Now, the Myers-Briggs is probably the most famous of those personality tests, but I prefer the Big Five. The Big Five is more scientifically based. They've done long-term studies and figured out where people line up on these different categories and where they end up in life. It's a very broad overview, and you can play around with it quite a bit in order to finalize and gather the nuances of your characters. All right, so the Big Five test a person in the following areas. There's conscientiousness, there's openness, there's agreeableness, there's neuroticism, and extroversion. Big Five. When I say these things, most of the time they're associated with either a positive or a negative emotion. So when you hear the word agreeableness, you think, oh, we want to be agreeable. Well, that's a good trait to have. Whereas neuroticism, you don't want to be a neurotic person. However, there are different positive things and there are also negative things associated with each one. For example, we're going to be talking about conscientiousness today. A conscientious person is generally more orderly. They're also generally more busy. That could be hardworking, or it could just be they're very oriented on a task. It doesn't mean it's a task that is worthwhile. There is a mental illness that is associated with conscientiousness, and that is anorexia. And I'm going to explain why that is in just a little bit. This is, of course, not to say that all people that are conscientious are at risk for being anorexic. It doesn't mean that all anorexics are overly conscientious. It's just something that they've noticed as a correlation over time. When I'm talking about all of this stuff and about mental illness and stuff like that, although I am a nurse, I am not a diagnostician and I'm not a psychiatrist or a medical doctor. This is not medical advice. This is merely a video describing how I use these personality traits to create my characters and hopefully providing you some tips and tricks along the way. So don't be going out there and diagnosing yourself or your friends or anybody with mental illnesses because you saw a YouTube video. Just don't do that. Don't do that. Something else that is characteristic of the Big Five personality test is that each of these personalities are based on a spectrum. There's some people that are very far on one side of the spectrum, and there's some people that are very far on the other side of the spectrum. So there are very, very agreeable people, and there are very, very disagreeable people. Most people lie somewhere in the middle there. There's just something to keep in mind that it is a spectrum. Conscientiousness is, like I said before, broken down into the two categories. There is orderliness and then there's industriousness. And you can find all my sources about this in the description below. People high in orderliness have a very high sensitivity to disgust. Cleanliness is next to godliness. The world is black and white, geometrical in shape, and everything must be in its place. These are your perfectionists. Now, this is not always bad, but you can see where it might go off the rails just a little bit. People who are extremely high in orderliness, anything that is flawed must be eradicated or destroyed or starved. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum would be people that are aware of messes and aware of disgust, but it just doesn't bother them. So they can see the mess and they might even tell you, yeah, this is kind of messy. They're just not, it just doesn't bother them and they're not motivated to do anything about it. So in an industrious person, these are the people that have trouble sitting still. And it's not necessarily that they just feel like they have to do something all the time. It's like they have an aversion to sitting still. So they can't sit and relax and just do nothing. They'll be sitting on the couch knitting a blanket. It's like they just have to have their hands doing something all the time. So obviously the problem related to this is if your industrious person is unable to relax, that can cause constant stress in the body and later harm their bodies and cause some long-term conditions in that regard. It's interesting to think of if you have a conscientious person who is high in orderliness and industriousness, but also high in neuroticism. They have this desire to have the world of perfection, and there's also that anxiety on top of it, so they have trouble getting started, getting their stuff done because of that anxiety level, but they also feel like they need to be doing something, it makes for a troubled individual. That's something to keep in consideration when you're writing a character. What part of conscientiousness do they have, and is it interfering with their life, or is it actually a boon and helpful to their life? However, the personalities associated with high conscientiousness, whether that be orderliness or industriousness, are often linked with success. That sort of makes sense because these are the people that are always going to be working and striving and trying to build things, and they're never stop, they're always doing something, then the more chances they have at achieving success. Now, most people lie somewhere in the middle on this conscientiousness. They see the mess, they deal with it, but they're not overly bothered by it and spend their entire day worrying about it. So it's not a pathological line of conscientiousness. One of my favorite things about this personality thing is that whenever you do like a Myers-Briggs, you almost feel like you're stuck on the personality that you land on, but not so with the big five, because as we know, people can change over time. And so a person might slide a little bit from this side of the conscientiousness to that side of the conscientiousness scale. You can use that with your character arcs. Say your character, they're a bit too agreeable, or they're a little bit too unconscientious. They really just don't care about something. And then something happens and they have to get their lazy bum up and start working towards that problem. You can actually slide them along the spectrum of these big five personality traits and get them to a certain point. Or they are a workaholic and they need to spend time with their family and they slide back the other way. But you can see how this works and about how these character arcs can flow from the personalities. So how are these characteristics modified? Well, with a conscientious person, say you're on this end of the conscientious spectrum and you need to get more conscientiousness. Say you're a teenager whose family's falling apart and or their mom got a diagnosis or something, you know, whatever's going on with your character, but they're obsessed with their video games. But they notice that these problems are happening around them. Well, something that they could do would be to create a change in their life that would be more conducive to success. So they throw out their video games. And so they focus more on what's going on with their family life. Or say you've got this person over here who wants to get a job advancement. So they start creating a schedule and they stick to the schedule to make sure they get everything done. Or they just start trying to do different habits to make themselves more successful. And those are some things that could help you bring to the other side of the spectrum. That can also happen with your overly conscientious person. So say they're always at work. Well, they decide, I just missed my daughter's birth and I don't want this to happen ever again. So they start making modifications to their behavior to slowly start going back towards a more balanced life and towards the middle of the spectrum. And that's how you would create a character arc with your story. This is the personality trait that has gotten completely out of hand. I want it to move more towards the center, and you can start moving your little personalities across the board. Which reminds me of a Doctor Who, the Bells of St. John, you know, little personality traits going up and down. Yeah, a little creepy there on that one, but still, it's actually not a bad way of thinking about it. So I'm going to give you a practical example of a conscientious character. I'm going to use my character Jared in my new novel, Surviving Midas. Now, Jared is a 17-year-old boy who is currently a slave in a drug farm. He doesn't have many possessions, but the ones that he does have, they're very neat and orderly and in their place. Everything has its spot. And he's very industrious, which, you know, he doesn't really care much about his boss's job or their venture. It's like he can't help himself. He's just so industrious that whatever he sets his mind to do, he does well. And it has not gone unnoticed by his captors. In fact, he has risen to a place of power among the slave workforce because of his industriousness. Now, the other part of that his captors don't fully realize is the fact that he's always doing something underneath the surface level. He's always working on a plan to escape and to survive and do all these things behind their back. They are using his industriousness to their benefit, but he's using it to his own benefit as well. Now, notice that I didn't say that Jared had excellent hygiene or had manicured nails and perfect hair or anything like that, because he's a slave. So he doesn't have access to regular bathing, he doesn't have access to regular clothes. So he might choose to be more neat and tidy. It was up to him. But in the current circumstances, I had to bring out that personality a little bit differently. So that's when your setting is integrative to your character as a whole. Alright, so in my next video on the series about the Big Five, I'm going to be talking about agreeableness versus disagreeableness. So if you found this video interesting, if it's helpful to you in developing your characters, be sure to hit that like button, the subscribe button, the bell for notifications, so that you never miss my videos. I'm trying to get these to come out about once a week. And stay tuned for more information regarding my novel, Surviving Midas. I'm hoping to make some big announcements in the near future. So thanks for joining us, and I'll see you again next time.